Hello and welcome to the Now Spinning Magazine podcast with me, Phil Aston. And I'm absolutely delighted to have as my guest today, Steve Hackett, former Genesis guitarist and solo artist extraordinaire, and just just finished this new album, Foxtrot at 50, with lots of Hackett highlights as well. One of my first questions, Steve, is, I should ask you how you are to start with. How are you doing? Because this was a massive a project, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good. We're going to be taking that same project or that same album to the States. They haven't heard this revisit of that stuff yet, so they won't have had Foxtrot in its entirety, at least not by me or members of the band. So I'm looking forward to doing that in just a few weeks.
You've done a few of these Genesis Revisited projects, and obviously this is the latest one. Was it always the plan to do them in this order, or is it?
Well, no, it wasn't. No, originally I was cherry picking across the best of Genesis, and that gave me quite a deal of freedom. But the idea inevitably came up of doing a revisit of an entire album, and I think the first one we undertook was Selling England by the Pound, so which was a year later than Foxtrot.
Yes, of course,
and I also twinned it with Giving People Spectrum Warnings as well, which was an early favourite of solo stuff. So we gave them both on a show, and then I believe we moved forward to Seconds Out, if I got the chronology right.
Yeah.
Well, Seconds Out is a compilation album, and always was, heading towards the late 70s, of a summation of what the band was capable of at that time.
Yeah.
Foxtrot is earlier, so I'm going back earlier. I'm not trying to troll through the years and do every single album. That doesn't really appeal, but Foxtrot certainly appeals as an entire entity. I think it's one of the two best albums. If I was honest, I would say that the two best albums from the sort of classic Genesis period for me are Foxtrot and Selling England. Those two, I think, typify what the band was capable of at a time when it was basically a pre-video era. If we did a video, it was a kind of anomaly. There might be the odd thing filmed in front of an audience in Shepperton, an invited audience. But in the main, we were yet to be filmed, if you know what I mean. We were all young guys, but it was pretty faceless in a similar way. I know that was. I remember reading something about Pink Floyd pretty early on. I was saying, they were having massive hits albums, but each of them will be able to travel on a bus and not be recognised by anybody in Oxford Street. That sort of that feeling. So I guess it was the same for us. We were faceless. The identity was all through the music. You could have looked like anything, and we often did.
Yeah. I mean, I guess all the filming was done in the audience's head back then. I remember when I was listening to those albums, all the visuals were in my imagination.
Yes,
what the music meant to me.
I think that's right, and I think that comes from an era of mid 1960s when music started getting very interesting with Beatles, and at that time nobody said let's do a film of Sgt. Pepper, although inevitably it happened later on. But the colour of it and the shape of it was on everyone's bedroom wall rather than on screen, so it was reflected out into a wider social scene perhaps than people poring over smaller devices, as indeed we are doing now.
Indeed we are. In the on the DVD, and one of the extras, you talk about your on-stage setup, and you go through all the different effect pedals you've got, and obviously you've got a very distinctive sound, but the stage setup you've got now must be very different to the one you had in 1972, even though you've still got that sound. What were you using back then? Can you remember what effects were available even back then?
Well, yes, it was still pedals because of the loud soft aspect of what we now think of as progressive stuff. So
Lightning
the
shade.
pedals
Yeah.
were in those days. I had a couple of fuzz boxes which I cherished dearly at the time. It was usually either a Marshall Super Fuzz or a Color Sound.
Color sound. Yeah.
The Macari stuff, and then there was a Shaftesbury Duo Fuzz, which was rather thinner and with more upper harmonic in it. And sometimes I used to use those in series. Two fuzz boxes used in unison.
Oh, right.
And it didn't produce a more fuzzy sound. What it produced was a more violin-like sound, and I used it extensively on Landmines Down on Broadway. That sort of sound I was using on my first solo outing as well. So when it was quite thin and piercing with a lot of upper harmonic in it, but it was essentially a sound in miniature. The stuff that I recorded on Foxtrot originally was on a tiny little amp, a Fender Champ.
Wow.
And I've got a feeling when I listen back to stuff like Blow by Blow with Jeff Beck, and he's not here to confirm this or deny it, but I suspect it was a small amp being driven relatively hard. But a Fender Champ was a little tiny thing, we would think of it like a practice amp now, but I used it extensively. And provided you're feeding it with enough stuff, there's no reason why you shouldn't record with a little small practice amp. And with all the devices that are available these days, make it scream like hell and make it sound like you're shaking the walls of the city, but you're doing it in miniature.
Indeed. Of course, back then, those things like Color Sound fuzz boxes had those giant metal button on the front that went clunk when you turned it on.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and usually big knobs as well.
Yeah.
So
noisy pots. Yeah.
Noisy pots. All of that, of course. Yes. You sound like you've been there yourself and experienced the joys of
yes,
all those things that need switch cleaner to make them.
Exactly. Exactly.
As you bring them in and everything.
Yeah. Also back in 1972, when I was kind of reading like the Melody Maker and the Sounds Readers polls, because that was very important back then. Bless you.
A tail end of hay fever. Sorry about that.
That's
I don't think I've ever sneezed on screen before, but there we are. He's off. Yes.
In the readers polls, there was because these were important back then. There was Jimmy Page and Richie Blackmore and David Gilmour and even Tony Iommi, but they were all very kind of blues based. And over the other side of the road, looking in, was yourself, Steve Howe and Robert Fripp, who had a more classical influence. Has classical music was that like a big influence on your playing style from the beginning?
And it still is today. When you think of the marvelous Rachmaninoff-like convolutions that keyboard players are capable of, you look at the guitar, the humble guitar, and you try and fool people into thinking it's a limitless instrument in terms of range.
Yeah.
And I'd be thinking about the nylon guitar here right now. But then what I was amazed about was hearing Segovia playing things that in the early days, those things that were recorded with precious little bottom and top, it could have been a keyboard. They sounded, especially those Bach pieces, the keyboard brain behind stuff that might have been written originally for violin or cello, transcribed for guitar, seemed miraculous to me. And they do really get the guitar ringing from bottom to top in the hands of a good player on a good night. So that's always informed my, not just that acoustic playing, but if I want to search for harmonies, it won't usually be with an electric guitar around my neck. I'll be playing single line in the main with electric, doing the equivalent of a burn up on a bike on it. But if I'm looking for harmonies, I'll be using the nylon guitar. I'll be using that. So that's been a lifelong passion for me, and I suspect for Steve Howe too. And of course, we worked together with GTR.
Yes, of course.
Briefly in the 1980s. Robert, of course, was coming very much from left field with jazz ideas, and I think it made for an interesting collection of our respective bands.
Yes, very unique, each of you. Yeah.
Well, I think you could tell that there was something outside. There was something outside blues going on. There's nothing wrong with blues. Absolutely adore blues for its ability to be able to convey raw emotion. So I won't hear a word against blues, no matter what its detractors say. But in the wider world, outside what blues is capable of doing, of course, you've got these wonderful melodies that exist in the world of classical music. It tends to come together in the hands of, or in the brain of Rodrigo, who didn't play guitar, but wrote Concerto d'Aranjuez, this famous piece for orchestra and nylon guitar, popularized originally by Miles Davis, doing a version of it for brass, known as Sketches of Spain. And he apparently popularized the thing. And now you'll hear it pretty much every day on a radio station or other. I remember in the heyday of listening to Classic FM, I'm sure that I heard 4 different versions of Concerto d'Aranjuez during one particular day, because it seemed absolutely right for what they were trying to do, crossover market, all that sort of stuff. So perhaps guitar was more salty for people to listen to, a little less stodgy than piano, although piano can sound absolutely wonderful. But the difference is that perhaps the lighter touch of the guitar is something that, I guess it goes back to the idea of the romantic troubadour trying to win the affections of his chosen lady, and the sort of pleading quality of that. So there's always been a romance, I think, attached to the guitar, whereas I think the pianos had this solitary feeling about it. By comparison, you think of Chopin, and one gets the impression that his main relationship was with his instrument rather than with any one particular person. So there was, it all seemed to get poured into it, which is why it's such emotional, beautiful music, and so influential today.
Very true. When looking at Foxtrot, when you created the music, the guitar parts back in 1972, you're obviously a lot younger, and you were influenced by different things going on around you in your life. And now, 50 years later, you've kind of re-looked at it. Was it easy to stay close to the originals, or did you feel you were wanting to overlay new interpretations based on where you are now in your life?
Well, I think that as long as with our band we manage to do authentic versions, we can stray away from the plot just slightly and add things like extra woodwind or brass to give it a wider palette. And sometimes I've worked with the occasional orchestra with this stuff in order to widen it, because I think that comes back to this thing you're saying about classical music, that in spirit a lot of it was classical. You could hear that in the playing of Tony Banks straight away. You know that certainly with that 1970s stuff, you're listening to a classical musician operating perhaps within, I won't say the confines of rock, I would say operating equally fluently, perhaps, with that great sense of harmonic adventure that he had.
Yeah.
And twin that with other people who don't often get a mention these days. I'm thinking of Matthew Fisher with Procol Harum.
Yeah, great player.
The stuff that was obviously Bach influenced, and more with the extraordinary efforts of that early band that I think had an influence on Genesis. There was a rich seam to draw from even within British music, without even looking across the water anywhere.
One of the most epic tracks, obviously, Supper's Ready. And it's been a firm favourite for fans for many, many years. And your guitar solo in the second part of the new Blu-ray is absolutely emotionally, technically stunning. It's just beautiful. Do you when you look at that piece of music now, is it like is it like almost a living oral painting that you're always adding like new brushstrokes to each time you approach it?
It's a nice way of describing it, an oral painting, because my dad was a painter, and I wasn't really moved to pick up the brush, but whenever I do a tune, particularly like one that I dedicated to him, was because he used to sell his paintings along the railings, Hyde Park, London's Hyde Park, around about Lancaster Gate. So every Sunday he'd be out there selling his wares, and I did a song called Serpentine Song, which was all about the lake in the middle, and I'd seen it in so many seasons going round, and I remember he took me around it when I was a kid, and he was showing me the Peter Pan statue, and his name was Peter as well, so I think of it as a bit like a tale of two Peters. But for me, it's my version of trying to paint that, or an oral painting, or a film for the ear, in a way.
That's a nice term.
A fluid idea of, as you were saying earlier, that all the images that you had from music were all in your head, and I suspect in the head of other listeners at that time, where you were less subject to video preconceptions. There certainly wasn't a Beyonce doing the equivalent of a perfume ad every time she's singing a song and jiggling her gorgeous hips. But music tended to have a different function, and it's a bit like reading a book in a way. If it works for you, the images are implicit in the text. So it was a different time, but music was riding highs, and at the center of our lives then, and I suspect now.
I know what you mean, because it's the track Los Endos, which is also on the DVD. That song, that piece of music to me, but based on what you were just saying, I remember I was working in a factory in Birmingham, and I hated it. And I used to play that piece of music when I got home. And there's a bit as it moves up towards, I had this visualization of it, like I was climbing up to a top of a hill. And as it got to that climax of it, I went over and I could see the sea and the horizon. And in my mind's eye, that's what I felt when the music played. And even as I'm saying this, I've got shivers down my spine, because it means that much to me. And it's kind of like the music, even though I was the same person, I was feeling the same. I'd come home from work, but playing that music changed the way I was feeling. So I've always felt that. And looking into the audience on the DVD, you can see all these people of all different ages. A lot of people have grown up with the music, and you can almost see tears in their eyes as they're kind of, it's really touching them on a really deep level. And I also feel like the audience now, back then when you were like playing Foxtrot the first time around, the audience were younger. Everything was like, probably a lot of people in the audience had never known loss or anything like that, because everybody. But now we're older. We all have experienced things like that. Well, and I think the music touches us on a very deep level, almost healing, in fact.
Well, I think that is the power of music, and the subtext is healing. People wouldn't go to watch music if they weren't there to be re-energized by it. And healing is all part of it. It's powerful medicine. When you read the stuff that Oliver Sacks wrote about the extraordinary illnesses that he'd encountered as a psychiatrist, and all of those things that were on the outer reaches of what the brain was able to do to people, whether it was to put them to sleep for decades, or whether it was dealing with people who were literally frozen and couldn't move. All of that a sort of Parkinson's aspect. It's something, I believe it's called akinesia, when you literally cannot move and you're absolutely frozen. And I know that my father experienced this sometimes because he suffered from this in later life. But it was something that Sachs was saying, that one woman could only move once she heard music that moved her emotionally. So this seems like a precursor to movement. And then, so it was very powerful medicine for her, literally. So the idea of music as medicine is absolutely true. So music might be magic for some of us. For others, it's medicine. It goes deeper. So I think of this, this correlation between healing and music, and it's something that's taking up more and more of my interest in life as I go on. As you say, you experience loss, you experience illness, either yourself or others, and the power of healing. I think that music's absolutely central to it. It's one option.
I think it if you're interested in music and the arts, and I think as you go through life, you become more sensitive to those kind of energies of healing, if you like. And I think you're more open to, because I think you can go through life and just shut down. If you experience loss, you just shut down and think, I'm not going to have that again.
That's
but
right.
You can't experience love without loss. And I think with music, it keeps your heart open. And I sense that playing this, everybody watching this and listening, you must get a copy. There is elements of that in the performance, the music, where you can see it in the eyes of the people watching. And for me, just watching at home, the music just, even though as we're talking about visuals, you're on my big telly, but you're also creating something that's resonating on a totally different level. It's just fantastic concert.
Well, yeah, I'm glad you liked the concert. I was very proud of it. I love playing this music again. It's I think as an album, it's probably got the widest influences of just about anything I've ever heard. When you consider that the first track is talking about this film for the ear stuff, that is Water in the Skies, where it conjures all sorts of stuff, spaceships, landings, crescendos, the drama of that, uncountable time signatures, all of that, the whole sort of alien language of that. So you've got from sci-fi to the influence of early music with Horizons, where you've got the influence of Bach, but the brevity from further back with the music of William Byrd. The Earl of Salisbury, little piece that's 1 minute, 30 seconds. And I devised Horizons to be precisely that. Just the idea, all we need is 90 seconds here. So you've got the influence of early music and science fiction. So you've got the extremes there, I think, of what the band between us, or what we were capable of doing and writing together. So, and then there's social comment too. There's humour. There's all sorts of stuff. And John Lennon very kindly said at one point that he considered us to be true sons of the Beatles. So there's an interview with this on that I've been told about by a friend or two, and I'm very proud of that. That if you think about the breadth of the Beatles stuff, I mean, their audience, the catchment was from 3 years old to 80, and beyond, I suspect. And that's amazing when you think of those, the traditions that they were drawing from, not just rock and roll, but vaudeville, classical music. If you include, obviously, the work of George Martin, his stellar work with them, you've got so much. You've got the whole of music to draw from. You know, it's The Laughing Policeman meets Gracie Fields meets Chuck Berry, and on.
Well, you're talking about all that. I mean, since the what's the album Out of the Tunnel's Mouth, which I saw you live in Falmouth in Cornwall, which is where I live. And since that point, I know you're coming out of a darker period of your life, but all the albums since then have literally one after the other have just been like a progression and really like a purple patch of great albums. But they're like classical, there's flamenco, there's world music, there's rock. There's you seem to just pull in so many different styles. Where does that come from? Is that something from Joe's lyrics, or where you travel to, or?
Oh, well, Joe's my wife. Indeed, she does suggest things from time to time. There's been the occasional travelogue, and some of the places that we couldn't travel to in lockdown, we did an album called I'm trying to remember it now. I've forgotten the name of it. Something about Under a Mediterranean Sky.
That's fantastic.
She knew that I wanted an acoustic album. She said, you'll probably just do something that sounds a little bit baroque, but what if you widen it and use world music influences and describe a number of countries surrounding the Mediterranean? And I thought that was an irresistible invitation to something that I had to really stretch my imagination to do it. So occasionally she'll throw me a line like that. Sometimes it'll be a curveball, and I'll be thinking, my God, how do I bring this one to life?
It probably comes together later on.
Yeah. We did a Russian one, which was just before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and all about Russian suppression. And we had the lyric maybe a good 6 months before I thought, how do I bring this to life? So I was thinking of if we could do something which was like cross between Prokofiev meets Tchaikovsky meets Stravinsky and a bit of rock, then we've maybe got a way of doing it, a very filmic, very sumptuous orchestral approach to it. It's something that Roger said to me about film music. He said, well, it's often orchestra plus. It's sound effects, it's orchestra, but it's plus, it's so many other things. And so we stretched the credibility to include rock instruments as well. But I suspect bands have been trying to do this thing for quite some time, possibly ever since the Shadows did Wonderful Land. And suddenly there they were, no longer
but you're
a pop group with a few guitars, but there's an orchestra.
You're in this wonderful position there where you can basically do whatever you like, and people are just open to your adventures musically, wherever you take them. I remember when I saw you on the Out of the Tunnels tour, I took my son who'd never seen you before, and I remember thinking, as you going through the set, I thought I had no idea how heavy metal you could be.
Right, yes.
Because your guitar playing, sometimes the way you use a tremolo arm, and it's savage, and then as gentle as a feather floating across a pond.
Well, I've probably become more savage in my dotage. I think the older I get, there was this thing about blues you were talking about, or perhaps I've imagined this, but blues. I wanted to be a blues guitarist ever since I heard John Mayall with Eric Clapton, and the Yardbirds with Jeff Beck and Peter Green, and all the people that I used to go and see in clubs with my tongue hanging out, thinking, these guys are doing exactly what I want to be able to do. And then I noticed that by the time that I'd become professional, I was having conversations with people who were saying, you mean the blues boom died on you too? And then we started doing something else. What we think of as progressive now, it wasn't that. We were thinking that, we'll try and come up with some original music. We weren't thinking it's got to have a Hammond organ and a mellotron that ought to be authentically prog. we weren't thinking like that. We were thinking, well, yeah, we can do something which is getting on for half an hour long in the case of Supper's Ready, or we can have a little single like I Know What I Like, and they can practically coexist on the same album. So I think that's the beauty of music, that if an audience is prepared to accept it, you can give them a wide range of ideas and have a number of writers in the same band. I mean, last night Joe and I went to see Big Train in
great
London.
band. Yeah,
and very, very interesting, hugely dedicated audience. And I've seen this in recent years with mates that I've worked with, such as the Marillion guys. And again, there's that sense of the audience being very, very loyal, and them living every note. You can tell how important it is for people. And I think, that's a great thing that isn't going to go away. It operates outside fashion.
I also think the audience understands the music so much more. I think the music has become more timeless, because even at the time, even if I think about myself, I was listening to Slade and T-Rex and, so 3-minute little tunes. And then behind the scenes, Foxtrot was coming out, but it was quite complex and almost inaccessible in places. But now, I've listened to more classical music and jazz. The entry point is so much easier.
Yes,
I'm realizing we're running out of time, but thank you very much. So the next,
thank you very much.
The next stage, you're going to the USA.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
So, and then I guess one last question I'd like to ask. Obviously, your last studio album is fantastic. You haven't really had a chance to tour that, or even do some of the great tracks that have come up through the last few albums. Is that something you might do beyond the USA tour? Yeah,
I think we've been talking about this a lot, and been working on a new album, and there have been so many shows, of course, that the priority is usually living out of a suitcase, and I'm working on paper a lot of the time. Ideas. I think, well, this might be a good one for the future. Let's see if it works on paper. Then there's a chance it might work with the band or with another collection of musicians. But the adventure has to continue in some way. I was just thinking the other day, about Brian Jones, who was amazingly capable and was about to, I believe, work with Moroccan musicians just before his untimely departure. And where would that have gone? Would that have been, would that have been Paint It Black to the Power of Pi? Because that's a very interesting area, all of that. The East meets West, guitar meets sitar, meets the tar. There are so many things from that family. And so, I work with those things. I've been using a mandolin recently for the first time, and that's been interesting. A Peruvian charango, all these things over the years I've got, but I can't use everything on every album. But then there's Vietnamese instrument, the Dine Shine, which is like the koto from the koto family. Great stuff. All these things that stringed instruments are capable of, plus a little bit of Middle Eastern oud, and fretless lute. Luckily, if you play guitar, you can figure out a few moves on these things, and they're very beautiful and all very, very different.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Steve, again, for all of your time, and best wishes to you, Joe, and the rest of the band, and good luck with the tour. And the best place for people to come to is hackettsongs.com to find out what you're up to, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, that will give everyone, the up-to-date stuff, and Foxtrot will be out in a matter of days. So thank you very much, Phil. Nice talking to you. No problem at all.
No, hopefully you'll catch up again. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.
A huge thank you to my guest, Steve Hackett, for his time today and sharing his thoughts on the new Foxtrot at 50 2CD Blu-ray album, which you need to make sure you've got. Absolutely superb. I've also reviewed it for the website and on the YouTube channel. That's out there already. So make sure you look at that. But it is well worth buying, listening, and watching. It really, really is. So thank you again, Steve, for your time today. It's been absolutely fantastic. Check out the Now Spinning magazine website at nowspinning.co.uk. Check us out on YouTube, become a member, subscribe, ring that little bell, join us on the private Facebook group, and I'll see you on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, wherever you think we are. The Now Spinning multiverse is there with you. So thank you again. Remember, music is the healer and the doctor. Take care, everybody. Keep spinning those discs, and I shall see you very, very soon.